welcome to this beginner's guide to the SONICWARE LIVEN Evoke. In this video, I'm going to show you the basic operations, controls, and features of the synthesizer so you can get up and running and making music with it as quickly as possible. Now, before we dive straight into which knobs and buttons do what, I want to take a step back and answer a more basic question here, which is, what is this synth all about? What are its distinguishing features? And there are two main things. The first one is the sound engine, which is a brand new, one-of-a-kind design from SONICWARE, which they are calling the Acoustronic Flux Oscillator. I know that might sound a little bit like a Star Trek technology, but it actually makes a lot of sense if you break it down. So first of all, our oscillator, the thing that's producing the core sound of the synthesizer, provides us with a blend of two types of sounds. On the one hand, there are sounds that are based on acoustic instruments, like a harp, for example. And then on the other hand, there are sounds based on electronic wavetable synthesis, like this one, which is based on a sine wave. Okay, so we've got acoustic and we've got electronic. Put the two sounds and the two words together, and you get an acoustronic sound. Okay, now you have 34 other acoustic instrument sounds to choose from. You have everything from various piano-based sounds, and other percussive instruments like a vibraphone, marimba, to string-based sounds like the violin, to wind-based sounds like the Peruvian flute, clarinet, to various other instruments like the organ, to the sitar. Okay, and then over on the electronic side of the equation, you have 22 different options to choose from. Everything from that, to that, to that, and you can take any of these 34 acoustic instrument sounds and any one of these 22 electronic sounds and blend them together in any way you want. You can have 100% electronic, 100% acoustic, or anywhere in between. Now let's go back to one of those acoustic sounds, like this upright piano-based sound. And notice what happens if I take a note and I hold it down. You can hear some sort of modulation going on, and that's another novel aspect of this oscillator, which SONICWARE is calling backtide modulation. Basically, we get to the end of the sound, and then we start going backwards and forwards in an undulating motion. Sort of like the ebb and flow of the ocean waves. And then if we go over to the electronic side of our sound, you can definitely hear some modulation going on over there as well. And you have a lot of control over all of this modulation. So to recap, we blend together an acoustic sound, an electronic sound, into an acoustronic sound. And that sound is constantly in flux, thanks to the modulation. And so we call the oscillator an Acoustronic Flux Oscillator. the way I like to think about it is we're taking these very familiar classic sounds like a piano, but we're then recontextualizing that sound by blending it with the electronic sound and modulating it with the backtide modulation, so that it becomes something that's both familiar and new at the same time. And that's also how I think of the second distinguishing feature of the synthesizer, which is the built-in granular effects. So with these, we take that core sound from our oscillator, send it to the built-in granular effects, and now we're really recontextualizing it, and we can recontextualize it in all sorts of different ways by manipulating the various parameters of the granular effects, which can take us in many different directions. I can take one and the same sound from the oscillator, and through the granular effects, I can transform that into So you can cover everything from very ethereal and beautiful to kind of glitchy and fragmented to some very dark and spooky territory, even though underneath it's still the same sound. Okay, now there are lots of other features on the synthesizer. Those are just the two main distinguishing ones. There's a lot of other exciting stuff going on with this, including a feature that I think is one of the most exciting additions to the LIVEN series, which is a chord mode, which allows you to play chords with just one finger, and you can even arpeggiate those chords automatically with one finger as well. And combine that with the fact that you have 4 other tracks of sound to work with, and you can hold sound in those other tracks and play them simultaneously. Well, without even using a sequencer, you can take another sound, like a contrabass, for example, and hold it, play some one-finger arpeggios on top of it, and you're already off to the races in terms of making music, and you still have 2 entire tracks of sound to work with. Okay, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Now let's take a look at how to actually use the synthesizer to do some of the things that I was just showing you. So I'm going to start by turning on the unit by pressing the power button up here. And when you turn it on for the first time, you're going to see the name of a preset pattern palette up here. This one is called Something in the Wind, which is actually a preset that I designed. And you can hear it by coming down here and pressing the play button for the sequencer. Press it again to stop. And if you don't hear anything, make sure that your volume knob is up. This is the overall volume of the entire unit, which might seem a little obvious, but there actually are a bunch of different volume level controls, one of which we'll go over later in the video, and others we'll come back to in the sound design video. And then if you want, you can come down here where you have the built-in keyboard with natural notes and sharp and flat notes. and play around with any of the 4 tracks of sound that comprise this preset pattern palette. Which track you're currently in is controlled by these buttons here. The red light indicates that we're currently in track 1, which is a harp sound. If we want to go to track 2, we just press the 2 button, the light turns red. And now we have a very different sound. This one is based on a horn sound, and then over in track 3, which we can select with the 3 button, we have some very orchestral sounding strings based on a cello sound. Same thing on track 4. Another string sound, but this one deeper in terms of octaves. Speaking of which, you can change octaves on the keyboard using these 2 buttons here. The right arrow will take you up in octaves, and the left arrow will take you down in octaves. And the light indicates which octave you're in. When the lights are off, you're in the middle octave, and then the further you go to the left and the further you go to the right, the lights turn green, then orange, then red to indicate that you are 1, 2, 3 octaves up, or 1, 2, 3 octaves down. And the octave settings for one track don't affect the octave settings for another track. So for example, I can have this track 1 octave down, this track 1 octave up, and if I switch tracks back to 4, well, this track is still 1 octave down. Another keyboard feature to know about is the hold feature. So to use this, we're going to come over to this button here that says hold on the top. We're going to hold that button down, and then if you press a note on the keyboard and let go, the note will be held. And if you want to stop holding it, you press clear, this button here, press and hold that, and then press the hold button again, and the hold will be cleared. And you can hold multiple notes. Like let's do 3 this time. Press and hold the hold button. Press my keys, let go. Let's clear the hold, press clear, press hold. And then you can also add additional notes to the hold. So for example, I could start by holding down 1 note, let go, and then if I want to add another note on top of that, I just press and hold the hold button again, add another note, let go, and the first note continues to be held, and I can keep on adding as many notes as I want. Another thing that we can do is we can start a hold on one track, track 4 in this case, switch to another track, like track 3, and start a hold over there as well. And these 2 holds are independent of each other. So if I want to go back over to track 4, I can clear that hold, and the track 3 hold remains. And then I could start a new hold on track 2, for example. And track 1. And then if I want to end all of the holds at once, I press and hold the clear button and then press the play button. And now the holds on all of the tracks end. Okay, so those are basic operations with the keyboard. We'll come back to the chord mode feature later. For now, let's move on to basic controls over the actual sound. And for this, I want to navigate to a blank palette, not one of the 16 presets that the Evoke comes with. So let's take a look at how to do that. So you're going to come over to this button here that says pattern on the top. Press it, and you'll see the name of the current pattern on the screen. And then to switch patterns, you have two options. One is to come over to this knob here, which says value, and use this knob to scroll through the various options. And if you keep an eye on these buttons here, which are labeled 1 through 16, you can see our progress through the current memory bank. We're in the first preset right now, then we go to the second one, the third one, and so on and so forth, up until the 16th one. And then if we keep going, we get to the second bank of palettes. The screen is telling us that we're in the second bank and the first palette inside of that bank. And then we can go to 2, 3, and so forth and so on. And then we have a third bank, a fourth bank, a fifth bank, sixth, seventh, and 8th bank to work with. That's a lot of potential scrolling. So another option that we have here is we can come over to these buttons, the same ones that we used for switching octaves earlier, and we can jump between different banks. So for example, we could go to bank 2, and then we come down to these buttons down here, the ones labeled 1 through 16, and we tell the synthesizer which palette within that bank do we want to go to. If I want to go to the first one, well, I just press the 1 button. And we transport instantly to bank 2, palette 1. Alternatively, if you use the pattern button and then the value knob to scroll through the options, you can preview the palettes as you go through them. You can even select different tracks within them and then go back to the value knob, continue scrolling, and so forth and so on. So at this point, we're just in kind of a preview mode. And then if you want to actually load one of these palettes, you go to the one that you want, and then you press the OK button. So now we're back in bank 2, palette 1. This is the first empty palette on the Evoke. And if you play the keyboard, you'll hear the default piano sound in each one of the tracks. Okay, so starting with track 1, let's first take a look at how to change the core sound that we're working with here. So that brings us back to the oscillator, the controls for which are these 4 knobs up here. The first knob is labeled instrument, and if we turn that, we can select any of the 34 acoustic instrument sounds. And I'm going to go with this marimba. Now remember, this sound is some sort of blend between our acoustic marimba sound and some sort of electronic wavetable sound. If we want to change the blend, we come over to this knob here, which is labeled blend on the top. And if we move that all the way to the left to a value of 0, our sound is going to be 100% the acoustic sound. If we move this knob all the way to the right to the maximum value of 127, then we have 100% the electronic sound, and then we can place it anywhere in between. For a blend of the sounds to one degree or another. And I think I'll leave it there for now. Okay, so that's the blend of our acoustic and electronic sound. And we've already seen how to change the acoustic instrument sound. If we want to change the electronic wavetable sound, well, that brings us to the wave parameter, which is the secondary parameter controlled by this knob here. So let's back up for a second. Just about every knob has a primary and a secondary parameter. The primary parameter is always labeled on the top, blend, for example, and the secondary parameter is labeled on the bottom. This one says wave, so the secondary parameter is our wave parameter or wavetable parameter. To use a secondary parameter, you hold down this shift button here, and then you move the knob. So now, instead of the blend, I am controlling the wavetable parameter, which controls which wavetable are we using. Now, it can get a little tiresome to keep holding down this shift button while you're doing that, which brings us to another thing you can do, which is put a shift hold on. This is sort of like caps lock on your computer keyboard, and to engage it, you press this function button here, and then you press the shift button. The light will turn orange to indicate that the shift hold is on, and now you don't need to hold down this button to use the secondary parameter of this or any other knob. And when you want to turn the shift hold off, just press the button again, and the light will go off to indicate that it's off. Now, if I come back over to this knob, now it's back to controlling the blend parameter. Okay, now there are two other knobs controlling 4 different parameters. For now, we're just going to leave the oscillator there, having covered the 3 most fundamental parameters. Okay, now down here with this row of knobs, going from here to here, we have knobs that basically control other sound design features that allow us to take the sound from our oscillator and further shape and refine it. Over here, we have a set of 2 knobs, and the primary function of these knobs is to control the cutoff frequency and the resonance of our filter, as labeled on the top. So here is our filter cutoff. At the maximum value, we're barely filtering the sound at all, and as we bring down the value, we're filtering more and more of it. Let's leave it at a middle value for now. And then over here, we have our resonance. So maximum resonance, and then less and less and less resonance. I'm going to put both of these at moderate values for now. Okay, now let's look at the secondary parameters of these 2 knobs here, as labeled underneath the knobs. And if we look at those labels, we can see that in their secondary capacity, these 2 knobs control our amplitude envelope. So to alter these secondary parameters, I'm going to put on a shift hold. And so now the knob on the left is controlling the attack parameter of our amplitude envelope. This is set to 0 by default, but if we bring it up, let's say around 40, now our sound comes in more gradually, and the higher we set this value, the more gradual it is. Or in other words, the longer it takes the sound to reach its maximum volume or amplitude. And if we go all the way up, we get a very long, slow attack, but I'm going to put it back on 0 for now. And so at 0, we have an instantaneous attack where we instantly go from silence to the maximum amplitude or volume. Okay, and then the secondary parameter over here is controlling the release of our amplitude envelope. This is set to a moderate value by default. When I let go of the keys, the sound lingers around for just a little bit and fades away pretty quickly. If I bring the release value all the way down, then the sound instantly disappears the moment I let go of the keys, whereas if I set the value all the way up, it lingers around and gradually fades out over a much longer period of time. But I think I'm going to put this back to the default value. And by the way I know what the default value is by looking for this dot to the right of the numbers. This dot shows us what was the value previously saved as, which in this case, because we're in an empty palette, is the default value. All right, so this first knob here, its primary capacity, as labeled on the top, controls our track volume, or track level. So I'm going to turn the shift hold off, and if I raise this parameter value, you can hear the volume of the track going up, and if I bring it down, you can hear it going down. I'm going to put it back in the middle to right about there. And the secondary parameter of this knob is our panning. So putting back on a shift hold, I can take our sound and I can pan it to the left, to 1 degree or another, or I can pan it back over to the right, or I can put it right down the center, and anywhere in between. Okay, now let's look at this knob. So this one, in its primary capacity, controls how much are we taking our sound from the oscillator, and however we've filtered it and shaped it with our amplitude envelope, how much are we taking that sound and now sending it to our built-in granular effects. So that's a primary function since it's labeled on the top. So I'm going to turn the shift hold back off and come back over to this knob. And by default, this is turned off. And the higher I set the value, the more we're going to send the sound to the granular effects. So I'm going to put this back to off and then gradually bring it up so you can hear how this works. Now, there are lots of parameters that control the granular effects, and they're controlled with a combination of these two knobs here and these buttons here. And for now, we're just going to use some granular effect configurations that are already built into the synthesizer. The first one is the one that you're already hearing. This is our default setting for the granular effects. There's a whole bunch of parameters that have already been set at certain values. However, you also have 16 grain patches that you can load, and each one of these represents a different configuration of parameters. And to access the patches, we're going to come down to this button here, which is normally part of our keyboard. But if we look below the button, we can see some text. Text below something means it's a secondary function or parameter that applies to the buttons just as much as it does to the knobs. And with the buttons, when there is a secondary function, the way that you access it is by pressing and holding the function button, this guy right here. So if I hold this down and then I press this button that says grain patch underneath it, now we've entered into our grain patch selection menu. We can see on the screen that we're currently on grain patch 1, and we can audition the patches on the keyboard. And then to select a different patch, we can either use the value knob to scroll between them, or use these number buttons to go directly to a specific patch. Here's patch 2, patch 3, and you get the idea. I'm not going to go through all of them. I think I'm going to leave it on patch 5. And okay, at this point, we're just in a sort of preview mode of the patches. If you want to exit this preview mode and just go back to whatever granular effects you previously had prior to entering the grain patch selection mode, you can just press the clear button, and then you'll exit, and you'll be back to the sound you had before, which in this case is the default sound. But I do actually want to load that patch, so let's go function, grain patch again. The last patch that we were on gets loaded first, so grain patch 5, which is the one I want. And if I want to load it, then I just press the OK button. And it'll say done and automatically exit. And now if I press the keys, now we have that patch loaded. Okay, so that's sort of the quick and easy version of the granular effects. For right now, I'm actually going to turn our granular effects off, or to be more precise, I'm going to turn off our granular send parameter so that we're no longer sending any sound from this track to the granular effects. So now we're back to this. And now I want to come down to the secondary parameter of this knob, which controls how much of the sound are we sending to the reverb. So secondary parameter, I'm going to turn on a shift hold. And with this one, behind the scenes, I actually had a little bit of reverb on this whole time, I think around here. But by default, this parameter is turned to off, meaning that we're not sending any of the sound to the reverb. And then the higher that we set this value, the more that we're sending the track to the reverb. Now I'm going to bring this back down to a more moderate value. And then I'm going to turn the shift hold off so that I can also send some of this sound to the granular effects. Now, there are 10 different kinds of reverb to choose between, and you can set the overall amount of reverb, and you can also set the amount of the sound from the granular effects that gets sent to the reverb. So there's a lot of fine tuning you can do with this aspect of the sound. There's one last thing I want to show you here, which is the chord function. So to turn this on is quite simple. You literally just come over to this button here that's labeled chord on the top, and you press that button, and when this light is orange, that means chord mode is engaged. And now if I come over to the keyboard and press a key, we hear a chord, C major chord in this case. And if I go up, we hear D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and then back up to C, an octave higher. Now that's just one style of chord that we have available to us. If we want to access the other styles, well, if we look at this button, it says style underneath it, so secondary function. So I just need to press and hold the function button and then press this button again, and we enter into the style selection menu. We see the current style at the top. This one is called diatonic. But if we either scroll with the value knob or press and hold function and press this button labeled style underneath again, we can also cycle through the options that way. Here's another C major, another style of C major, yet another one, and another, and another. Until we get back to our original one. I think I'm going to go with, let's say that one. And another way that you can think about each one of these style options is that each one of them gives you a different set of chords to work with within the key that you're currently in. So for example, if I play up my scale again, you can hear how each one of the chords within the scale is different. Whereas if I change the style again, we get a whole new set of chords within the current key that we're in. Okay, and then speaking of which key we're in, the way that we control that is the secondary function of this button here that says mode underneath it. Press and hold the function button and then press this button, and we can see that currently our keyboard in chord mode is transposed 0 semitones down. And what that means is if I press the C key, well, we get a C chord. However, if I come over to the value knob and I bring this value down or up, well, now we're taking our notes and we're transposing them down or up, -1, -2, or +1, +2, and so forth and so on, semitones. So to give an example, 0, -1, -2, -3, or I could go +1, +2, or +3. And so forth and so on. And whatever I end up choosing, let's say +3, well now all of the keys and the respective chords that they play have been transposed up 3 semitones. Now if I play the same scale as before on the keyboard, everything is now transposed up 3 semitones. Compare that to -3 down, or -5 down. And you can go all the way down to -12 and all the way up to +12. Anyway, so that's how you change keys in Chord Mode. And the reason I'm pointing this out at length is because in Chord Mode, you're only playing what would be the white keys on a traditional keyboard or piano, the keys corresponding to the natural notes on the keyboard. You do not play these keys up here, the sharps and flats, or what would be the black keys on a traditional keyboard. If you try to press those, well, nothing happens, because part of the whole point of Chord Mode is to allow you to play chords by just using the natural note keys. And if you want to change musical keys, instead of playing the sharp and flat notes as you normally would have to, you just transpose everything down or up to get where you want to go. All right, so I'm going to bring this value back to 0 so that we're not transposing and changing keys at all. And now let's look at the final setting that we have for Chord Mode. This one is the secondary function of this button here. So holding down function and pressing this button. Here we can control how exactly the chord is played. And once again, we can select between different options by pressing function and then pressing the button repeatedly, or we can scroll through the options with the value knob. So let me explain now what you're seeing on the screen. This is our default option, and with this one, we have 3 different distinct notes in the chord, and all of them are getting played. If I rotate the value knob and get to the next option, well, now the 2 has disappeared. And that's because this is telling us that now when we play the keys, only the first and third note are going to be played. The second one is omitted. If I move to our next option, well, now the first note is going to be omitted and only the second and third ones are going to be played. Or you can omit the third note. So compare and contrast. All different ways of playing the same chord in the same key and the same style, but omitting and including different notes. Now, if you keep going with these options past the one where you omit the third note, you get to a series of options represented by letters that all have to do with different ways of taking the same chord and arpeggiating it, or in other words, playing the notes sequentially instead of simultaneously. And each one of these options is a different arpeggiation pattern, or in other words, the order in which the notes are played. In this case, we're playing up, but we can also play the notes down, or up and down, and so forth and so on. There's a few other options here, but the ones I really want to point out are the final 2, where we go up like we did before, but then we keep going up an additional octave. And then we restart. And then if we keep going with the options, we can also do the same thing, only going down an octave. Okay, now when you're playing the notes in this arpeggiated style, the speed of the notes is determined by 2 things. One of them is our beats per minute, or BPM, represented by this blinking light right here. And then to change our beats per minute, we come over to this knob, which is labeled BPM, and we can move our BPM up all the way to 250 beats per minute. If you want a decimal value, you can come up to the value knob and bring that down to 249.9 or whatever you want. And then going back over to our BPM knob, we can bring this all the way down to 40. So I'm going to bring it back up to 120, which is our default, and now show you the other thing that determines how fast our notes go, which is the note value setting for the track that we're in. For this, we come over to this button here, the button that's labeled note underneath it. So that's a secondary function. I press and hold the function button, I press the note button, and we can see the current note value. So each note currently has a value of 1/8 note. Maintaining the same BPM, we can still make the notes slower or faster by changing our note value using the value knob up here. So faster, all the way up to 30-second notes, or we can make it slower. All the way down to whole notes. But I'm going to bring it back up to eighth notes. And then a couple more things to be aware of with the arpeggiation options here. One of them is this knob over here, dice, on the top of it, and this controls the probability with which notes are played. And this can be set anywhere between 100 and 25. So at 100, there's a 100% chance of any given note being played. But if we bring it down to, let's say, 75, well, now there's only a 75% chance of any given note being played, which means there's a 25% chance of any given note not being played. And so this both adds a bit of unpredictability to the arpeggiation and also introduces some rhythmic and melodic elements into the notes as well. And now I'm wondering, what would this sound like if we sent our sound to our granular effect patch? For right now, I just want to show you one last thing with the chord mode, which is that just like with chord mode off, so let's turn it off real quick by pressing the chord button. The light goes off. We're out of chord mode now. So just like we could hold notes by pressing and holding the hold button, we can also do the same thing in chord mode. So press the button to go back into chord mode. All of our settings from before are preserved. And now if I press and hold the hold button and press a key, now I can let go and it will continue playing. And I can switch tracks. And start playing something over there. Notice how over on that track, track 2, we still just have the default piano sound. That's because all of the controls that we've looked at so far are completely track specific and independent from each other. This second track can be set to a completely different instrument sound. Let's do a flute, and we can have the filter be different here. We can pan it in a different way. And we can send a different amount of this sound to our reverb. And our granular effects. And so on and so forth. And notice how if I turn chord mode on, well, that's a different style and a different way of playing it than we have over in track 1. So these settings are independent as well. The only thing that all of these tracks share in common is the BPM, and then we're sending or not sending all of the sounds to the same reverb and the same granular effects, but we can choose how much of the sound of a given track we send to them. And for example, if I decide that's too much reverberation for that sound, well, if I want to, I can turn the send reverb value completely off on this track. Although some of the sound from the granular effects are still getting sent to the reverb. So I think I'm going to turn chord mode off here. And I'll leave our sound like that for now. Over on track 3, I think we need something more in the middle because these sounds are pretty high. So let's go with a horn. And let's send a little bit of that to the granular effects. And the reverb. And then over on track 4, well, we have 2 high sounds, 1 kind of medium sound in terms of octaves. And now I think we need a deeper sound. Well, let's try an organ. And once again, let's bring up the reverb and the granular effects. And now just to see where we're at, I'm going to try layering these 4 tracks together to see whether or not they gel. I'm going to hold down a note, go to my next track, hold down another note, go to my next track, hold down another one, and then go over to my first track and hold down another key. Clear and the play button. So I think that was working okay, but maybe I'm going a little bit overboard with the granular effects. I'm going to try turning off the granular effects on this track. Or rather turning off our granular send value so that we're not sending any of the sound to the granular effects. I'm also feeling like maybe we need a little bit more separation in our stereo field. So I'm going to try going over to track 4 and panning this a little bit to the right. Let's pan track 3 a little bit to the left. Track 2, let's send this a little bit to the right. Okay, now the final thing I'm thinking here is that I want there to be some movement in this piece of music. I want to have a chord progression. What I'm thinking I'm going to do is over in our 4th track with our organ, I'm going to turn on chord mode. Pick a different style. Let's do variation 3. I think I could bring the filter back up a little bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play us out with a little performance. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.